one person waiting. Let him in.
That might be me.
Oh, never mind.
Did I let me in? Hi, world.
Hey, there we are.
Oh, hi.
I gotta mute us so I don't hear me twice.
Yep. Totes. Super hyper important.
All right. Good. Not over there.
Getting all your stuff up.
Get my mind note up.
You need to use Bunch.
Yeah, I do.
I need to use Bunch too.
Problem with Bunch is I don't think it's gonna get me as much traction as people maybe think it will, because every MindNode file is different. Every show note stock is different. I mean, I can go open it to like the folder or open the right app at least, but opening the apps isn't the part that takes forever.
Hi, Blake. Can't stick around long. Gotta fly.
Literally got a jet.
Hey, I wore mine today too.
It's a good Bookworm sweatshirt day.
It's a solid. This is like my go-to when I want to be warm and comfy.
Yeah, this thing is awesome. I ordered a second one because I wore out my first one.
Really? This is at least still my first one. Yup.
Forgot how soft and fuzzy they were when they're new.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I guess I have to start this one, don't I?
You do.
I also need to pick a next book.
You haven't done that yet?
Well, I have a thought, but I just want to check the club real quick because I haven't had a chance to do that yet this week.
Denver to Grand Rapids. I've been into Grand Rapids once. That's a little one, if it's the one I'm thinking of. Tiny little airport.
Flew into Michigan one time, and it was a tri-county airport. It had... I'm super quiet.
Oh.
Am I super quiet to you?
I didn't think so, but I was messing with the board for some other stuff, so
Okay.
it could be me on my side anyway.
It looks fine on my end, so I just want to make sure I'm doing something right.
Okay, I think I got it. I think we should be better. Let me know, Blake. It's very small. Mike is very small. He's tiny. He's tiny.
What was I saying? Oh, the Tri-County Airport. Yeah, it had 8 gates, I think. Well, I say 8 because Appleton has 8, and it was roughly the same size. But yeah, it served 3 counties, and then I got there, and I'm like, oh, I'll just get an Uber, but Uber doesn't exist.
No.
So by the time I realized that, I ran outside and just was able to catch the last taxi and jump in with somebody else. Otherwise, I would have been there probably hours because the closest town is like 50 minutes away. That's my traveling to Michigan story.
Good job, Michigan.
What was I looking up on my phone just now? I didn't practice the narration. I was telling a different story instead. Completely confused me.
Good job.
Oh, the club. That's right. So club, Bookworm. Check out these recommendations. Oh, there's a good one here. Dang it. May have to change it.
Completely unrelated. And I'm not going to say too much right now because we're live, but I've been having tons of thoughts about the future of Bookworm lately, which I know is never fun for you. Because you usually have to be like, Joe, no.
As long as you're not about to tell me that you can't do it anymore,
Nope.
we're good.
Complete opposite, probably. So yes, lots and lots of thoughts, and I've
Oh,
been trying to stop them, but it doesn't always work.
I
Guande
gotta
has a new
find
book.
out. I gotta find out. Is Carol here?
Don't know.
I can't see the number of people watching anymore. I don't know why that's not showing up on my screen.
Because nobody's watching.
Blake left already?
Bye, Blake.
Well, I got a new pen.
You always got a new pen. Oh, you got
Did you
orange.
know?
I'm gonna start calling you Brad.
Yeah. Uh, when was it? It was last Friday, I think. It was National Fountain Pen Day.
Why do I miss these things?
Well, you're probably fortunate you missed it because National Fountain Pen Day means fountain pen sellers have sales.
It's true. It's true.
So I got this. It is a Leonardo Mementos Zero. Mango is the color.
Okay.
Let me see if I can get my camera to focus in on this real quick. It's actually like a really cool acrylic body. Come on, Cascable, work with me here. So the way to adjust focus in Cascable, by the way, is to double click on a part of the picture, but then it has all these boxes that appear and it can't. There we go.
You gotta hit it.
But you got to hit it exactly, and then it triggers an algorithm and it tries to determine what should be in focus and doesn't work all the time. So
you can't move off that spot
cool.
while it's doing that.
Basically, so when I'm holding something up and it's waving like this because my hand is jittery, it has a real hard time focusing on that.
Sure. I'm in the middle of putting up a new camera for all this stuff too. Got a Sony Alpha that I'm picking up for it. Super fun.
Nice. All right, I'm changing my next book. Give me a second here because that means I now have a Gap book.
What ink is in it? Blake wants to know.
Pen Addict Fire on Fire, obviously.
Obviously. I would not have guessed that.
Well, okay, so
That's like saying, what switches do I have on my keyboard?
So the Pen Addict Fire on Fire orange ink, I really do love it, not just because Brad makes it. I originally bought it because Brad made it. But it's this bright orange, which is really like what I kind of like is those brighter colors. I don't really like the black and the blue black and stuff like that. I use those occasionally. I have some of those pens, but I don't know. The bright ones, the colorful ones, that's what I like. And then the Fire on Fire, it has this, I get the terms mixed up. I think it's sheen, where like depending on how much ink is put on the page, it will be brighter orange in the middle, and then the outer edge of the ink will be more of a red.
Okay. Yep.
And Robert Oster makes a couple of these inks. They have another one called Fire and Ice, which I think, no, that's not the Carolina Pen Company. I forget. Maybe that's just a standard one. That's like a turquoise-ish blue with a red sheen on the edge, and it looks super awesome. So those inks are fun.
Cool.
All right, so you're not going to believe my my book here.
Are you going to tell me now, or are you going to...
I will. Just let me get the Gap book here because I want to put that in too before I forget.
You putting it out in the outline but not announcing it yet? Is that what you're doing?
Yep, because I can't
tease it for the end.
Talk and type at the same time, apparently.
You just did.
Not well. I forgot what I was doing.
It's like anytime,
there you go.
If Becky is working in the kitchen or doing leather work or something, and she's super focused on it, and I come in and like, so what'd you think of the pastor's sermon on Sunday? And she'll be like, I thought
4 cups of flour,
and then she'll stir.
Yeah.
She's like, was that this Sunday? It's like, he usually preaches on Sunday, yes. I don't know how to. And then eventually, after she's attempting to get her one sentence out, she's like, not to ask me these questions while I'm cooking. Like, I can't do this. I can't do 2 things at one time.
Yeah.
It's like, this is why I ask these questions in the middle of these times.
I feel you, Becky. Feel you.
Oh, I almost picked this one last time. I was like,
Did
this
you?
was right underneath. So this is perfect. I was on the edge of selecting this one.
All right. You would probably not have picked. Probably not have predicted I would pick this one.
No, which is why when I see it, I'm like, wait, hold up. But yes, not what I expected you to pick.
We're not going to reveal it yet. Sorry, Blake. You're going to have to download and listen.
Gonna have to wait.
Let me just check the previous one. I want to make sure. I have actually read a ton of books recently, so I want to make sure that. Okay, I did mention The Power of Positive Thinking last time. I finished that one. That one's awesome.
Positive thinking.
5 stars.
Yeah.
I think I'm good. You want to push some buttons and record a podcast?
Sure. It's kind of fun to do that.
All right. The mix pre is good to go. Audio hijack is good to go. You ready?
Blake's not happy. Yes.
Ha ha ha. Sorry, Blake. 3, 2, 1. So we were talking before we hit the button, and I feel like we should just make the PSA right now that these Bookworm sweatshirts that you and I are both wearing at the moment make great holiday gifts. So if you want to pick up your own or get one for that special book lover in your life, there'll be a link in the show notes. But these sweatshirts are amazing.
By far my favorite. Like I mentioned earlier, before buttons were pressed, this is my go-to when I want a comfy, warm sweatshirt. Like I don't know what it is. Cotton Bureau does a good job, but it's my go-to. Like anytime I just want to kick back and be cozy. Even my daughters mention it. Like it's that sort of, because, you know, daddy-daughter snuggles, and they like it when I wear this one. I even had my youngest ask if I would wear it this past Sunday, so that whenever we snuggled and watched This Old House on Sunday nights, I would be cozier to snuggle up to. There you go.
Nice.
So see, there you go. Bookworm sweatshirts promote family life. That's the takeaway right there.
Love it. One other thing I want to throw out there in this holiday gift guide episode of Bookworm is we have a new focused calendar. I'm not sure if you have seen these before, Joe. I don't know if you use the New Year calendars.
Yeah.
But they're pretty great. I have one on the wall behind me. This is the 2021 version, and the 2022 version actually has a bunch of upgrades to it. I worked with Jesse Phillips, the guy behind New Year, and we added a whole bunch of things, including dots on each day to track habits. So kind of like check circles, if you're familiar with OmniFocus. There's room at the top for like your words for the year or your themes. And there's 2 calendars in one now. There's a portrait and a landscape orientation. Both of them are dry erase. When you buy one calendar, you actually get both of them. They're double-sided printed. So you could change your mind halfway through the year if you want. But again, we'll have links in the show notes to those. It's one of the few things that we do at the Focus Podcast. We don't really do T-shirts or any of that sort of stuff, or haven't yet anyways. So if you do want to support my work over there, I appreciate you giving me a few moments over here to point people in that direction.
Yeah, I've never done like the wall calendar thing, but I understand people absolutely love it. They do.
Well, maybe I'll have to get you one for Christmas.
I'll stick it over my shelves back here.
David had his mounted on foam core, so you could do that and then just tack it onto those bookshelves.
There you go. I get sheets of plywood at the house.
All right, we have one action item for follow-up here, and that is your processing of what skills to spend time honing. Did you get a chance to do this?
A little bit, yeah. So I'm realizing that the areas that, and when I'm talking about what skills to spend time honing, like I'm specifically referring to the skills that I do for content creation and making things for like how do I share my thoughts online. That's the primary thing that I wanted to process because I know I've been bouncing all over the place over the years as far as how I do that. And I know that like writing is one of the things that I like doing and I'm decent at and want to get better at, but haven't done in a while. So that's I think one of the skills that I'm going to start trying to hone a little bit more in the future. Obviously, like we do the live streams, we do Bookworm as a podcast, and there's a bunch of stuff we do around audio. I do around audio and video, and we'll continue to do that, but I'm not going to make that a focal point to get really, really good at, especially the video side. The audio side, I feel like I will forever tweak just because I can't help myself. But I don't really need to dedicate time to getting better at that one because it's part of my day job anyway. So there's that. But yes, I'm planning to work better at becoming a better writer. That's the thing that I need to focus on, I think.
Nice. Sean McCabe is proud of you.
Yeah.
His big thing is whatever you're doing, you need to become good at writing. He even had a like mini course, 30 days to better writing or something like that he did a while back. And he's a pretty good writer. We've interviewed him for the Focus podcast. Not pretty good. He is a very good writer. He's specifically a very good writer when it comes to crafting stories around products and services. His whole business is Daily Content Machine. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but he takes like your video and you give him the raw file, and then he chops it up into little pieces to be shared on all of your social media platforms and posts something there every single day. So he like finds the highlights, strips them out, and then makes them shareable, which is a really incredible idea. And he wrote a book, which I have on my bookshelf here somewhere, called Overlap, which is kind of like if you have a side project, a passion project, something that you're doing that's not your main gig, kind of the path for engaging with that in a meaningful way, with the intention of maybe that becomes the main thing at some point. So you're kind of like switching lanes, but that's a very delicate transition and process you have to go through. I think you and I have kind of both been through that before.
Yes. Yes.
Probably made some mistakes along the way. So he's just trying to help people do it a little bit better. It's a great book. I will put links to Daily Content Machine and his book in the show notes for people. The skills that you're gonna spend time honing, I know you kind of boiled it down to writing. I will throw out there that there are some people clamoring for some more Joe Bulig Twitch streams. I saw some comments in the club like, where did Joe go? Doesn't he do the video stuff anymore?
Yes. It's a good point. I need to. Life, that's what happened. So
yeah,
my goal, and this is something I'm working towards. So I'm trying to step one with the writing. Okay, so like that's the thing that I'm making a central point, right? Because I know that that's kind of where my roots are online, and the goal is to take that and then expand off of that writing into some of the YouTube streams and stuff that I was doing for a while and have taken breaks from. But honestly, there's like some weird scheduling issues with that, with me being able to have this area available for that. But there's also time and effort that goes into them. People don't realize that it takes about as much time to prep for those as it does to actually run them. So it's not just a one-to-one thing. So I got to have, if I'm going to do a 1 hour stream, it takes me at least 2 hours, if not more, to have that up and running beforehand. So anyway, there's that. But yes, it's on my radar. I'm not completely gone. Just it was a good idea to take a break so that I had a place for my kids to sleep at night. That's generally a helpful thing. So we're
just taking a sabbatical, another Sean McCabe thing.
Taking one sabbatical to work my tail off in another area. Yeah, that's kind of how it worked.
Cool. One other thing I will tease. I don't have a link to share just yet, but we'll throw it out there that I will be doing a workshop with Nick Milo of Linking Your Thinking on sense making. By the time this publishes, I might have the link. If I do, I will stick it in the show notes for people who may want to attend that. It's going to be a 2-hour paid workshop. He and I are going to do it together over at the Sweet Setup. And I've been doing some prep with Nick on this. He's awesome to work with. He's a really smart dude. I'm very excited about some of the mental models and the lenses we're going to give people to look at things through. I've learned a lot from Nick over the years. I went through that workshop myself, and that was really the thing that made Obsidian stick for me. Probably am not still using that app if it wasn't for that workshop. So every time you get to ding that bell, pour one out for Nick Milo.
Yeah, and
All right.
I have to admit, like, you and I have been back and forth over the whole linking your thinking process, and like I've realized that a lot of my angst with what happens in the world of Obsidian has to do with terms. Like, I'm not usually having issues with what people are doing. It's usually what people are naming things that I've had issues with. And like, I've got kind of my own system that's morphed from a combination of a bunch of different things. But things like, I've given you grief for the term map of content over the, I don't even know how many episodes and stuff. And I think I texted you, was it last week, 2 weeks ago, something like that? It's like, I think I finally figured out why I don't like that term. It's because I really don't like the term content. Like, I have an aversion to the word content, even though, like, I refer to myself as a content creator. I hate saying that. Like, it just is nuts to me that I don't like that word that much. I have no idea why, and I don't have a replacement for it. So it's not wrong. So, like you said, like, we'll just call it a map. It's like, I'm totally game with that. Like, I'll call it a map. Just don't use the word content. Like, that's my thing.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't realize it was simply a matter of the terminology that was causing such a visceral reaction from you.
Yeah, and I don't think
it's kind of cool.
I think at the beginning, I don't think I could have told you that. I don't think I've been able to nail down that's why I've had an aversion. But as I've spent time, like, okay, let me run through, if I'm going to diss on a system, I usually want to know it really well. And I do a ton of research on it before I ever say, like, this is a terrible idea. And I did a lot of digging. It's like, I don't have an issue with how it works. I just have issues with all the terms. But at the beginning, I don't think I could have said that.
So what you really could have used was a map of content about why you don't like maps of content.
Possibly, maybe.
Anyways, let's talk about today's book, shall we?
Sure.
Today's book is Soundtracks by Jon Acuff. And believe it or not, this is the first Jon Acuff book that we have covered. Can you believe that?
I actually, when you told us that this was our next book, we went on this whole thing of like, wait, is that true? I don't think that's true. That can't be right. And I went through and checked the website, and sure enough, this is our first Jon Acuff book. It's by far not the first Jon Acuff book I've read. I'm sure it's not for you either, but
it's not.
I was dumbfounded that this is the first time we're covering one on Bookworm.
So we both kind of thought that we had covered a Jon Acuff book before, but we had not covered a Jon Acuff book before. Do you consider that to be a good thing or a bad thing?
I think that's a failure.
This, I think, may come back when we talk about style and rating.
Yeah, it's true.
But yeah, so Jon Acuff is an interesting guy with an interesting story. I first heard of him when I read, I think it was Start. And what really I liked about Jon at that point specifically was his story coming out of the Dave Ramsey Corporation, where he had been working there and he had this goal to publish this book, and he was flying all over the place, giving talks whenever he could. And I don't know the specifics here, but it kind of sounds like Dave Ramsey supported him in publishing this, because I know for a long time the book was actually listed in the Dave Ramsey store. So this was probably around the beginning of like Amazon becoming the place that you went to buy any book online. At least in my mind, I'm thinking that there was still a question at that point when I first came upon that book of like where you would go to find something. And I was kind of surprised that it was available both in the Amazon store and on Dave Ramsey's store, because the other stuff in Dave Ramsey's store was just on Dave Ramsey's store. It was kind of exclusive.
Right.
So maybe that is the, the data point I'm cherry picking here to tell this narrative that Dave helped launch this guy. Maybe Jon would tell a different story. He actually begins the book by telling the story of the worst boss I had, but then he says, "Oh, by the way, that was me." So before we get into the actual content here, I'll just break down the breakdown of the book. There is not 3 parts. I kind of wish there was. When I was putting together the outline, I was thinking, how do we group these things together? I think we got to take it chapter by chapter, but I also think we can easily get through all this. So chapter 1, I think I can do this. Chapter 2, the choice is yours. Chapter 3, turn down the dial. Chapter 4, borrow from the best. Chapter 5, win the week. Chapter 6, don't fight it, flip it. Chapter 7, zig your way to positive thinking. Chapter 8, put the new anthem on repeat. Chapter 9, gather evidence. Chapter 10, make a soundtrack stick with a symbol. So there's no real grouping of this stuff. It's just one chapter after the next, and he tells it very linearly, and he has kind of a system he wants you to follow here. But that being said, let's jump into chapter 1, which is, I think I can do this. This is where he's laying the groundwork for the whole idea of this book, which is that we are very negative creatures, is the TLDR here. We, as a species, tend to overthink things, and overthinking tends to lean towards the negative. So this soundtrack's title for this book really comes from this idea of you have these playlists of voices that you've been listening to. Some of them are from other people, but a lot of them are probably originate from you, that are telling you all these negative things, these negative stories you believe about yourself and about the world. He calls those broken soundtracks. And he's kind of imploring us at the beginning here to change our playlists and to get some new tracks to listen to, which I think that analogy is actually really cool. What did you think when he started laying the groundwork here?
It's a good way to think about it, because like I followed Jon Acuff on Instagram for a while. He's hilarious. He's just a funny guy. But he's been promoting soundtracks for quite some time, and having not read it, I didn't always understand exactly what people were referring to whenever he would post their comments and such about it. But having read it now and going through the concept of soundtracks, to me it makes a lot of sense, because if you think about important songs in your personal life, like there are certain songs, like my wife was a theater major in college, so musicals are a big thing in our family because of that. And there are songs that, if I wanted to see my wife when we were in our dating years, I had to go to her shows, which were all musicals and such. So the songs that came along with those shows are ones that are forever embedded in my brain, I think. And some of those are hilarious. Some of those are strange. If you've ever seen the play You're in Town, not You're in Town, but You're in Town, those songs are not going to leave your brain, like, ever. So there are a lot of things that happen in our household, and we will sing one of those lines. And for whatever reason, like, every time those songs come up, like, some other thought goes through your brain and it takes you to that time. Or it can reverse, like you go to a time, like you have a memory and a song comes to mind when that happens. And that's the concept. Like, whenever something comes into your brain, like a soundtrack, like a music track, it usually has something associated with it if it's an important song. So if you take that into the way that he is using that as an analogy, you've got these thoughts that you're going through your brain repeatedly, and that's the part that he's referring to as a soundtrack. These thoughts that we tell ourselves, these phrases that we repeat to ourselves, those are our soundtracks. So I think this is kind of where he lays that all out.
I love the mental picture that I have of Joe's life as a musical.
Yep. It's very entertaining.
Your whole morning routine, I just envision you like waltzing your way down the stairs and singing as you make your French press coffee now.
I don't drink coffee now. Have I told you this?
Oh, no, I don't think
Oh
so.
my, there's a confession. I have not had coffee in months.
Mm,
Joe's a tea guy now.
wow. Bombshell drop.
Sad day. I think it's a
Well, I
sad day.
will
I don't know.
drink it for you.
Thanks. You have to drink a double for me. So yes,
All
at the
right.
moment I'm headed down the Sparky train.
That is unfortunate, but I think understandable. I'm keeping my coffee, but thanks.
Go for it. I won't try to talk you out of it.
But the whole idea of the musical, I don't have the experience that you have, but I have seen my fair share of musicals. And you're right, Jon Acuff, typically when I think of him and his social media presence specifically, he's kind of a jokester. He's a funny guy. And that comes through in some of his writing. We'll talk about that when we get to style and rating. But I kind of feel like maybe he did this and I just didn't see it. It definitely did not come through a whole lot in this particular book, but that kind of seems like maybe missed opportunity, like Jon Acuff the musical. He would be the
Sure.
perfect guy for that.
Totally.
'Cause that's just the extension of the soundtrack's theme
Yep.
a little bit further. I don't know. Maybe he didn't want to take it that far. Maybe he wanted it to be more applicable to everybody because everybody knows what a playlist is. Everybody knows what a soundtrack is. And that was as far as he needed to go, was to think of your life and then what are the things that are playing in the background as you go about your day to day.
I'm going to send him a note. I don't know that I'll ever hear from him, but I'm going to send him a note. Dude, you got to make this into a musical.
Yeah, he does. So one of the things that he just kind of mentions here in this beginning chapter is that we have these defaults and they're negative. They stem from this overthinking, and he's got these steps to transform your overthinking, which is essentially retire the broken soundtracks, replace them with new ones, and then repeat them over and over again until you forgot about the old ones. I like the way that's framed. I think those 3 steps are a great encapsulation of every book we've ever read on habit formation and behavioral change. But it's also not that simple, I don't think. I'm kind of curious, after you read this first chapter, how did you feel about this? Did you think, was this effective in like priming the pump? Like, okay, yeah, let's do this, John. Or was the red flag already up? Because I've talked to a couple other people around this idea. My Gap book last time, The Power of Positive Thinking, I've been reading that one after this one because this topic is just kind of fascinating to me. And I was kind of surprised a lot of the reaction I got was, well, yeah, I don't really believe in that stuff. So which way were you leaning at this point in the book?
At this point in the book, I was very conflicted. So there was a lot of, oh yeah, I definitely tell myself negative things all the time. Why do I do that? And what do I do about it? So like that, there's that side of it that I was all in. Like, okay, yeah, you got me. And then there's the flip side of it where I had in my brain like this whole world of think happy thoughts. Like I have that in the back of my brain as well. Like this is way too frou-frou. Like this is not, I don't believe that. Like there's that side of it in the back that I'm at this point, I was assuming he was going to get into. Like, here's how you do that with thinking you're going to be the top in your company. Like, visualizing the future of things. Like, that's kind of what I had in my brain. So at this point, having gone through the first chapter, I was very much on the fence. Like, one side being, okay, yeah, all in, let's go. And the other side, like, what are you doing? Don't do that.
Right. Yeah, David and I talked a little bit about this topic in the latest Focus episode, which is not published yet, 139. I'll put a link in the show notes. But we were talking about this voice and like how he handles it and what my response was to it. And the way that he asked the question, I realized that this voice, that positive affirmation voice, to me sounds a lot like Tony Robbins every time that I hear it.
Exactly,
And
yes.
that's not a good thing, in my opinion. Nothing against Tony. I think he does a lot of good. I remember a story he told when he published the Money book about how when he grew up, his family was poor, and he remembers his mom and dad fighting about the fact that there was no turkey for Thanksgiving on Thanksgiving Day. And he's watching this happen. And then somebody rings their doorbell and delivers them a Thanksgiving meal. And from the proceeds of just that book, he served tens of thousands of Thanksgiving meals because that had an impact on him and he wanted to pay it forward. So nothing against Tony Robbins personally, but his style, I can't, I can't handle it. And I realized that a lot of this stuff, it comes to me with that voice. Even a lot of the books that people have a negative first reaction to, and I think I did too, to books that we've covered that we both liked, things like Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, thinking of Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. Like, you read the titles and you're like, oh, it's all about manipulation, getting whatever you want. No, that's not it at all. And I realize it's the because I read that title, I hear it in Tony Robbins' voice, and then I'm like, no, I don't want to be like that.
Yeah.
And so I just immediately write it off. But when I force myself to engage with it, and when I force myself to read it and kind of understand what the authors are saying, like, it's really good stuff. And so I'm a little bit conflicted here too, but I've kind of leaned into this. I've shared, I read The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale as a follow-up to this one, because I really want to explore this topic and decide what I really think about it. And I'm sure that'll come out by the the end of the podcast here.
Yeah. And I know that, like, I don't really know what to do with this. Like, maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but the part that I struggle with is that he's talking about the negative things that we put on repeat in our brain and that we tell ourselves over and over again. Like the story about the magician who didn't want to charge to do shows. Well, it's because there are other people better than me. Like, well, if you extrapolate that out, it means that you can't charge for a show until you're the best in the world at magician stuff. Like, you're the best in the world at magic. And you're not going to be the best in the world at magic unless you're charging for shows so that you can do more shows. Like, it doesn't, like, it's a competing logic, but we don't realize that until you stop and process it. So then you have to tell yourself, well, people are paying me because I'm good enough to be paid for it. But that's not the soundtrack we put in our brain. We focus on that negative side of it. So part of me is like, okay, well, I'm not really one of these positive thinking people. Like, think happy thoughts. Like, that's not my thing. Like, it seems weird to me. And yet I have to admit, like, repeating all the negative stuff absolutely isn't helpful. Like, that's not
exactly
a positive thing in the long run. So then the question is like, okay, do you just, like, because you're not going to have no thoughts about your own life. So pick one, negative or positive. I guess that's what I'm left with. So there's the logic I'm currently fighting with, Mike.
Yeah, and I think I'm fighting with that too. That's actually a great place to go into the next chapter. So let's do that. Chapter 2 is The Choice is Yours. And this is basically talking about the options that we have in terms of the soundtracks that we listen to. And there's 3 questions he poses here, which I think are pretty brilliant. three questions to ask about your soundtracks. Number one, is it true? Number two, is it helpful? And number three, is it kind? And you should only listen to a soundtrack if you can say yes to all three of those, which is where I have to wrestle with some, because I think I default to, is it true? Yes. And then stop there. But I see the value in asking the other questions. And I've actually even applied this with my kids, because the older kids will fight with the younger ones when they see them doing something that they know is wrong. But the younger ones don't really even realize that they're doing anything wrong. And so it's just like, hey, knock that off, and it comes across like really mean and forceful. And then the little ones are offended because my brother's just telling me what to do. And so I've stopped them and asked this question. So is what you are saying to your younger sibling, is it true? Yes, they should not be doing that. Is it helpful to tell them not to be doing that the way that you did? Well, maybe they'll stop doing what they were doing that's wrong. So I'll give you that one. But is the way that you said it kind? No, obviously not. Okay, well then maybe don't say that.
That's a really good
Which
point.
is kind of,
like, I hadn't thought about translating this to interactions with other people. I was only thinking about it, what was going on in my own mind. So I love that.
well, that's kind of the interesting thing about it when it's in an external circumstance, but I have trouble seeing it sometimes when it's internal.
Did I lose you?
I think I'm back. I did lose you for a second. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got you.
Well, I'll just restate that whenever you're ready to go.
Yeah, I think I'm good.
Okay. That's the interesting thing about that, though, to me, is that you can totally see these things. I can totally see these things when it's in an external circumstance, but when it's in my own head, I have a hard time identifying them, which is surprising to me because I also kind of grew up around this stuff. I mean, my dad owns a software company that has products on emotional intelligence and self-determination, and self-talk is a big piece of that. So I've understood it for a long time. Like, hey, you shouldn't practice negative self-talk, because usually it's some form of don't do this, don't do that. And your brain just fixates on the action. It doesn't attribute positive or negative, do this or don't do this. It's, if you, to borrow an analogy from golf, if you're saying don't hit it in the water, don't hit it in the water, your brain fixates on the water, your body and mind kind of align, and you end up hitting it towards the water. It's really, really bad at differentiating those things. But the minute that I can like get it out in a different context with some people that are outside of my own head, it becomes crystal clear.
Yeah, that I can kind of follow you with that, because I don't like I tend to go the other way around. I don't always take the processes that I work on my own brain and externalize them. I tend to like keep everything in my head. Like if somebody has made me upset and I don't like the way that they are handling something, I will do one of two paths. I will either internalize it and never speak about it, or I will internalize it and maybe mention it to my wife once. And that's as far as it goes. So unless it impacts somebody else, if it impacts the third person in some way, then I'll talk to that other person. Because I know, like, I've had instances with folks online. It's like, okay, I need to talk to Mike about this. Like, there's a thing that he needs to know about. So then we'll have that conversation. But I generally just internalize things. But yes, sometimes translating it to an external situation would be a very positive thing.
And to be fair, I mean, the whole book is about the internal application of this. So that's where we should definitely focus the conversation here today. Let's move on to the next chapter. The next chapter is chapter 3, Turn Down the Dial. And this is specifically talking about, okay, so you have these negative soundtracks that you've identified, and they're internal, not external. What do you do to get rid of them? Because he makes the analogy of most people think that it is a switch, and all you have to do is flip it on or off, kind of like your standard light switch. And he says that it is actually more like a dial. And I never thought about this just now, but the light switch on or off, that makes a ton of sense. And then the dial, I think he's kind of going for like a radio analog dial metaphor to go along with the soundtrack stuff, but I don't remember that really standing out to me. Maybe the better analogy would have been a dimmer switch, just to stick with the whole lighting metaphor. I don't know. But anyways, that's the goal. Is like you're not going to eliminate this completely. You're just going to turn it down a bit. And I think that's an important option that many people, myself included, a lot of times don't realize it exists. So maybe you can't get rid of it completely, but at least squelch it a bit so it's not as loud.
This whole chapter completely messed with my head in a very good way, because I started to think through my productivity habits, my ADHD tendencies, like these things all surfaced. Like how I live basically came up, and the choices that I have made and the processes I've gone through to choose, like, what software do I use? What method of keeping track of tasks am I going to use? How do I keep track of notes and information online? Like, how do I do all of this? And so many times I have found myself like hunting for that tip or trick or that system or that process, the management style. Like, I've hunted for these things saying, oh, that's the way that I need to do this. And it's a yes or no, always a yes or no. Like, if I'm not finding the motivation I need to read the book every day, to read those 20 pages every day, which thankfully Bookworm is a pretty solid motivator for that for us. But you know, if I'm not finding the motivation, well, then there's some switch that needs turned off or on in order to solve that problem. Like, that's generally the way my brain has translated this, the way I think about it. And when he references this as a dial, I'm a sound guy, so I immediately think of faders. Like, it's not a dial, but I immediately thought of a fader. Like, I use the Rodecaster Pro, so I manage everything with faders. Faders are my world. Like, I love faders. And like being able to run that fader up and down and turn things up and down, it's not a on or off, it's partials. Like, that resonated with me so much. Like, okay, so trying to adopt, you know, let's use a classic one here. Is like, if you're going to adopt GTD, like, it doesn't have to be a yes or no, and it doesn't have to be a solve all thing. Like, it could be a partial. Like, there might be one or two steps in GTD that are gold for you, and that's what you need to hold on to. Maybe there's some piece of the mindset that's good for you, but you don't have to adopt or do all of it. You could steal from other systems. Like, some of my note-taking system right now is combining like 4 different systems into one mashup, and I still haven't got it where I want it to be. But I find myself still hunting for that other thing that will solve all the problems. But it changes per day, so because you know, it's a dial, it's not a switch. So I don't know. I really, really enjoyed the way that he posed this, because again, it made me stop and think through things at a much different level.
Yeah, you got me thinking about that comment about looking for the perfect thing and assuming that the perfect thing is just going to flip all the switches.
Yes, yes.
Instead of stealing little bits and pieces that can help you fade in the right direction, which I feel like is a much more beneficial approach, but is not one that we really want to consider a lot of times. And I'm just kind of thinking, why is that? Why do we hold out hope for this one thing that is going to magically make everything better? And why do we, myself included, attach to these systems that people profess in these books that we read so eagerly, believing that it's going to, when I've seen time after time after time after time after time, like, it works a little bit, and then I decide, yeah, this isn't for me. And like you, I think over the years I've kind of adjusted my approach and learned to take what I want, discard the other stuff, and create my own mashup of all of the things that works for the way that I work. But that's hard to package. That's hard to I don't want to say systematize, formalize maybe. Do this, then this, and get this result. And it's interesting to me that we both thought that way about systems and the way that we work and the books that we read and stuff like that at this point. But this book also is laid out like that system where you do this and then you do this and then you do this, etc. And then at the end, he has a very specific solution for you in the new anthem, which we'll get to. But maybe this is a good point to go into chapter 4, which is borrow from the best. So just continuing down this progression here. Borrow from the best. It's easier to list out the broken soundtracks than to identify new ones to replace them with. And this, I think, is very, very true. And a lesson that took me a long time to realize. The fact that we have negative defaults, the fact that we keep going back to things that are broken, it's because we fail to fill that void once we say, this is the thing I want to change. Maybe this is the reason a lot of New Year's resolutions fail now that I think about it. And I know that habits are really the thing if you're going to affect some lasting change. But as I think about the way that most people set New Year's resolutions, maybe it's just, I want to lose the weight, whatever. And they don't replace it with an alternate picture, but also soundtrack, I think fits this analogy too, where I'm going to be a runner. So I'm going to run. And what does a runner do? Well, obviously they run, but also it extends beyond that. They eat healthy, they get enough sleep, they do all these other things that allow them to do the thing that you don't necessarily have to itemize. You don't have to plan this project perfectly. All you really need to do is attach to that identity at the beginning of the year and say, this is the direction that I want to go. But it's not a knowledge problem. On page 89, he says the antidote to overthinking is not more thinking. The antidote is action. Sean Blanc in the focus course has this saying, action brings clarity. And I love that because, you got to pick a direction at first, but it doesn't have to be 100% correct. You can't steer a parked car. And so as soon as you take a step and you start moving, then you have the ability to course correct. And a lot of people, I think myself included, if I don't catch myself, mistakenly believe, well, it's easier to turn and go in a different direction if I haven't started to do the thing yet. But actually the opposite is true.
You can turn the wheels on the car all you want, but it doesn't actually change direction till it moves. Like that's
exactly
the way to think about it, right? So there are so many times that either myself, like I've done this, like I've tried to figure out, okay, what's the best topic for me to choose for the next live stream? Okay, so let's take that. Like, okay, well, if I choose something like Obsidian or something I'm talking about there, well, I'm doing a few things. I'm adding to the hype around Obsidian, showing people what I do with it. But it's also going to get more viewers than if I were to call it my text file setup. You can change the entire demographic that shows up for a stream based on what you title that. And I've played the game of trying to think through what the right path is for that. And then at the end of the day, I end up choosing to talk about marketing and something completely unrelated, which means that the whole choice that I'm trying to make on which way do I label this just gets completely put off, and I don't actually go anywhere with it. And that whole thing doesn't happen at all. So that's something I've done many, many, many times in a very small way there. But it's also happened in a lot of big ways as well. Drawing a blank on what those are right now, but I know that happens fairly regularly, it seems, where I think through things more, and in my head, like thinking about it and making the plan tends to make me think I already accomplished it, which is not a good thing to think. Like, okay, here's the path forward on how to get this thing out the door. Great. Have you done anything on it? No, but I know how it'll work. Like, that does me no good at all.
Yep. Yeah. And as I'm talking through this with you, I recognize that this borrow from the best, really there are lots of different ways that you can frame these positive soundtracks. And I guess what I just did is I took that action brings clarity and habits, not goals, not New Year's resolutions, and I kind of made those my positive soundtracks. But if those don't resonate with you, he gives some other examples in here. He uses one for business specifically. People are trying to give me money. That's a interesting way to think about things. And what would that change in your online business if you actually started to believe that? Now that's the cool thing about some of this stuff. As I'm thinking through these, that's where my brain goes. It's like, okay, so if you start saying these things, if you start really believing these things, how does that change your day-to-day life? And some of the areas of my life, as I force myself to answer that question, I recognize they would be visibly better. So maybe I need to just try some of this stuff. Another one, I'll feel awesome after. And this is like a tactical thing that I used for a long time just to establish the habit of going to the gym. I'll feel awesome after I get to the gym. Spare change adds up. Pick ROI, not EGO. Pivot, don't panic. I mean, you can fill in the blank with whatever inspires you to do something, but and that's really in the title, I think, borrow from the best. This doesn't have to be completely original. If you hear something somewhere and you like it, take it, make it your own, and then use that to try and change these negative soundtracks, turn down the dial, the turn down techniques. Actually, that's from the last chapter. We kind of skipped over that. That's one of my action items, by the way, is to identify some of those turn down techniques. Just things that you can do tactically to silence those negative voices. And then this chapter, have a mechanism that you can use to start to replace them with positive ones.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people that have maxims that they share online. Like people love to come up with these one-liners. If you follow Gary Vee for 3.2 seconds, you'll have about 4,000 of them. And you could easily take one of those that you resonate with and make that one of your soundtracks. Like that's, if you want to summarize this chapter, that's the way I took it. It's like, just find something that works, something you like, throw it in your brain, and repeat it. There you go. You got a new soundtrack.
It sounds so simple.
It's so true. Like, oh, this is easy. We'll take the negative ones, make those go away, and then put these new ones in place. And then all your problems will be solved. We flipped the switch, Mike.
Just flip the switch. Speaking of flipping switches, I feel like this next chapter definitely fits the switch diagram better than the dial one, which is win the week. It's kind of interesting to me that he used that terminology because when you use the word win, you imply that there is a winner and there is a loser. Those are two states. There's nothing in between. It doesn't matter if you went to overtime. It doesn't matter if you set a personal best. If you lost, you lost. None of the stats mean a thing. And this chapter on win the week, I get what he's going for here. He says the way to accomplish a big goal is through overwhelming action. And what is the soundtrack that will encourage you to take overwhelming action in whatever area of your life? And he says, ask yourself, where do I want to win this week? So he's not saying, absolutely crush it, Gary Vee style, knock it out of the park. You can sleep when you're dead. But it does have hints of that, I feel, where it's like, just do whatever it takes to win. I would prefer, and this is kind of based in the habits, like, don't focus on the score. Don't focus on the outcome. Focus on the process. Do the little things right. Just make sure that you check those boxes and the score is going to take care of itself. So this chapter out of all of them, I think maybe I dislike this one the most. What did you think about Win the Week?
It felt like a mid-book pep talk. And when you mention like the winning yes or no, it's like, how pregnant are you? Like, well, there is no in between there. Like it's yes or no. Like, okay. So thanks for bringing that up, because I felt like something was off with this chapter and I couldn't quite nail down what it was. I think that's probably it, because it reverses what we had 2 chapters earlier with the whole fader dial thing and puts us back in the switch. But at the same time, like, this felt very much like, we've mentioned Gary Vee a few times, Tony Robbins, and like that category of person that's like super high energy and just goes. Like that type of person. I feel like we all have either seen or know someone who's like that. And I don't think that's for everybody. And this kind of feels like a motivational chapter to say you should be. But I don't think that's true. And it's kind of frustrating to me that he slipped this in there. So, I mean, I get what he's saying. Like, if you want to try to take it for his intent and not what we're actually interpreting it as, if you take it for his intent, I think what this is like, you're at chapter 5 out of 10 here. So we're dead center on the book. And I felt like he's laid the groundwork in showing us that we are overthinkers. He's shown us how to make the choice, that it's not a yes or no, how to come up with better soundtracks. Like, he's shown us all of this. And now it's kind of like the switching point. You know, if you're going to have a peak here that we switch gears in the book, I felt like this was it, because we've now laid out the groundwork. And now he's like, okay, here you go. You can win. And then after this point, he starts giving you the tactics. And as you're referring to, kind of a system here. I felt like that kind of starts maybe in the chapter before, but it's also like, to me, this is kind of the crux where he starts to do that. I don't know. Maybe that's reading into it too much, but that's how I felt.
I don't know that it's reading into it too much, and I also don't know that his intentions are completely pure. He did write the book start.
And finish, though.
Where, yeah, that's true. That's true. I don't know. I think it's probably best just to leave this one here and recognize that there isn't a whole lot here in terms of the process that he's outlining that I would recommend you absolutely adhere to. Basically, what he wants you to escape is inaction leading to overthinking, leading to inaction. So it's kind of a negative cycle. And the way to step out of that is to interject some action. But I would argue that that doesn't mean that you have to dominate.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, this, I'm kind of downplaying this chapter. I think if you listen to what I just said a second ago, like, that's kind of what I'm doing here. But if I take it from like a broader society stance, like, the default is to do nothing. For most people, the default is do nothing. Everybody has like these dreams, these things that they have in their head that they want to do. Very few people put in the work every day, build the routines and habits to actually make those happen. Like, that's generally what I would say, is like, that's not the norm, that people have overwhelming action. It seems like the people who talk about, 10x your work, like, when they talk about that, the goal isn't to actually achieve 10 times the amount of work. The goal is to get more than what you're doing now so that you're moving faster.
Yep.
And
yeah,
I think that's actually probably the benefit of this, is you're going to have people who are reading this who have talked about starting a blog, who have wanted to get into a running habit, who have decided to start a YouTube channel or whatever it is. Like, they have wanted to do this for a long time, but felt like they're not the right person. It's not the right time frame. They're not motivated enough to do it. Like, you got to start somewhere, and overwhelming action, like, that's actually a subjective term, I would say. Like, it's not a definitive, here's what that means. Like, overwhelming action when it comes to Joe splitting wood is actually quite high. Like, that's a very big number. But for someone who's never been around an axe or a chainsaw or anything, overwhelming action might mean getting 2 or 3 logs split, like, as in 2 or 3 pieces cut. That would be amazing for some people. It's like that's a very different category. Like, what does overwhelming action mean? So I think it's going to depend on your situation and where you're at. So if I kind of package all of that, I think it's probably a good chapter to have in the book. But you and I are coming at it from the stance of a lot of the other books that we've read and knowing where we sit, because you and I both do tons of things, probably more than we should. And when someone tells us that we need to have overwhelming action, it feels like they're telling me I don't do enough when I'm probably fine. So I don't know. Take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, you made a good point about the people who want to start a blog or start a YouTube channel. In my case, it was write a book.
Yeah.
And that is a authentically Jon Acuff message, because I remember when I read Start, that was the thing that kind of resonated with me. He didn't say it this way, I don't think, but that overwhelming action, showing up every day and writing for an hour before I went into the office, like that was the thing that got me to write the book. That's the thing that got me into a lot of the things that I do now. And at that point in my life, that's exactly what I needed to hear. So it's kind of interesting to me now that I have a somewhat negative reaction to the same advice, but I think maybe it's because my thinking on the situation has changed, and I'm coupling it with that win versus lose. So if you're able to dissect that a little bit, I think maybe you're right. Maybe it's fine, but don't take it at surface value. That's for sure. Let's go to chapter 6 here, which is don't fight it, flip it. And this chapter is talking about criticism and curiosity is one of the things that I picked up out of here. The opposite of criticism is curiosity. Prepare for the worst and be surprised when it doesn't happen is a pretty bleak way to go through life. To create a new soundtrack, essentially what you want to do is you want to take that broken one and you want to turn it around, turn it upside down, is in his words. That reminded me a lot of the great mental models and this mental model of inversion. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, I hadn't connected those dots, but as soon as you said mental models, like, oh, wait, what was the term that they used for that? But yes.
Yeah, so the inversion is essentially attacking it from a different direction. And the example of inversion, I don't remember if this is the exact one they used in the book, but the one that comes to mind is like, if you're a designer and you're trying to design an app, the typical approach is, well, let's make this as user-friendly as possible. But when you take that approach, you don't know what you don't know, and so you might miss a lot of things. So one of the ways you could practice inversion is like, okay, let's think about everything that we could do to make this app as hard to use as possible. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, well, let's make the touch targets really tiny and let's make the text hard to read and the colors all hard to discern. And then you have a picture of what not to do, basically. And he's saying in this chapter that you kind of already have that picture of what not to do from the broken soundtracks that you've probably been listening to, that your brain conjures up. So you can invert those and you can think about them from the positive side. So the exact opposite of the things that you've been doing is probably the things that you should be doing.
I like this one a lot. And I don't know if that's because, like, the thing with this is it's impossible to read this book and not start noticing what soundtracks you're telling yourself. Did you have this? Like, I had a bunch of things that I've told myself over time that I didn't realize I was telling myself. But
yes, part of that for me came from reading my Gap book after this, though, because that speaks to it more specifically than Jon Acuff does. But
sure.
Yeah, you got to wrestle with that stuff. If you don't, you're missing the entire point.
Yeah. So I started to notice what I tell myself a lot more and was not aware that I was telling myself certain things, and starting to realize that if I take what I'm saying to myself and then flip it upside down and change it to the opposite of what I was originally telling myself, like if I do that, what comes out of it? So trying that process, it's like, I'm pretty hard on myself. That's pretty much what I learned. I
Yep.
have very high standards for myself, and I come nowhere near achieving those. So trying to flip what those are and how I'm criticizing, like that can actually be quite helpful. So this is one of the more helpful chapters I found in the book.
Yeah, I think it is one of the more helpful chapters in the book. To be honest, I'm not sure how much I would have connected to this had I not had the additional data point of the inversion. um, just turning a problem upside down in the analogy of like the record that he's going with in this book doesn't really work for me. But he gave me enough that my brain was able to connect the dots in a way that was pretty effective. So I think it's possible, if this is your first foray into the self-help genre, that maybe the whole soundtrack metaphor, sticking to that so rigidly, is actually a negative thing. But I don't know. I think it's probably fine. Agree with you though that in terms of impact to me, this was a good one. The next one was also very impactful. So let's talk about that. Chapter 7, Zig Your Way to Positive Thinking. And that's a weird chapter title, but that is because it is talking about the story of Seth Godin, one of Jon Acuff's heroes, who was going through a really tough spot in his career. And he got through it, he said, by listening to one of his heroes, Zig Ziglar, for 3 hours a day. Are you familiar with Zig Ziglar at all?
Yes, I've read at least one book of his. I've read like part of a biography of him as well. So
He's
yes,
another one of those guys that I've heard his name, I've seen his books. Everybody kind of talks highly of it, and then I'm kind of like, that just doesn't really hit right for me. But I think I have to take another look at that. Uh, the main point that he's talking about in this chapter is that it is easier for most of us to just keep repeating those negative soundtracks than a negative one, and that you need to flip. I almost said flip that switch. You need to change that narrative. That is a switch actually that needs to be flipped. Essentially, he's trying to get you from one extreme negative to the other extreme positive. But in this specific chapter, he's talking about it. It's that positive affirmations and the constant repetition that does something in you. It kind of solidifies that. So you can do everything up until this point. You're starting to move in that direction. And now you just got to keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it, no matter what it looks like. And this is the part I think a lot of people are going to struggle with, because there's this phrase, fake it till you make it. And nobody likes doing that. It feels very inauthentic. It's like, well, I'm going to identify as this thing, and I'm just going to keep saying that I am this thing. And your brain is instantly going to tell you you're not that thing. You haven't done anything to validate that title. And John frames it interestingly here. He says that you're not faking it till you make it. You're telling the truth in advance. What's your reaction to that phrase? Don't fake it till you make it. Tell the truth in advance.
I've never liked the whole fake it till you make it thing. I've said it, and I've attempted to adopt it in numerous cases. I think there's something to be said about identifying as something and then working your way towards it. Who is it? Jeff Goins, who talked about how he was writing and writing and writing, and if somebody asked him, are you a writer? He would say no, even though he was writing constantly. And it wasn't until he started to identify and tell people, like, I am a writer, that he started to improve his craft and become much better at it. Because there's also like the side of it, like, I am a writer. Like, okay, well, if you're going to identify as a writer, what should you do? Well, the number one thing you should do as a writer is write. So there's that. So,
yep.
identifying as something, in order to live up to it, you have to do certain actions. And I think that's some of what is intended with that whole fake it till you make it concept. But I think I have a strong interest in just tell the truth and be honest. And trying to play these games is tough, I think, to swallow. Maybe that's my aversion to it. I'm not real sure. At the same time, like, I definitely do this in cases, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Conflicted about it, Mike.
Well, I am too. So I do believe in the power of confession and your words having an impact and changing not just your mind, but even the atmosphere. I think there's truth in that, but this don't fake it till you make it, tell the truth in advance. This feels gimmicky to me. It feels like, oh no, I'm not telling you to fake it till you make it. That's not it at all. I know why you don't like that. Just this isn't that. We're just telling the truth in advance.
Yep.
It feels
You're rewording the same thing.
exactly.
That's all you're doing. You're putting
yeah,
lipstick on a pig. Like, that's all you're doing.
It feels like one of those things that the picture I get in my mind, I don't have a specific picture, but it's like a movie where this person is in this scenario where they're being asked to do something that they know is wrong. It's against their moral code. And someone's trying to convince them, oh, no, I'm not asking you to, no, I would never ask you to do that thing. And then they just like try to convince them to do it by framing it a different way. And you can like see the angst on their face and they're trying to decide, well, is what this person is saying true? Or should I, stick to what I know? And I feel just the way that is phrased does more harm than good in this particular chapter. But I do like this chapter. My other action item actually comes from this chapter, which is to ask myself, am I focusing on the problem or am I focusing on the solution? Which again kind of gets back to it's easier for most of us to focus on the problem, those negative soundtracks. I'm really good at that. I'm really good at finding problems, but I'm not so good at my default being, okay, let's solve that and let's figure out a solution to that problem. And so this question, I feel like forcing myself, or at least encouraging myself, to answer this helps me shift my focus from negative to positive. I guess we'll see if it actually sticks, but I do recognize the value in that. And this is the point in the book where I realized, you know what? There's something here, but I don't think I'm going to get it from Jon. So I got to find some other books on this topic, which is where my gap book last time and then also my gap book this time are kind of coming from.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in this chapter. I mean, I've not become a big proponent of Zig Ziglar, but I also have a hard time refuting what he has promoted over the years, which, like, he's a big proponent of positive thinking, of course, and thinking your way to new heights and such. But I don't know that I've ever tried to fully adopt what he's promoted, at least in its entirety. But I also have a hard time, like, the whole positive thinking world. Like, we had a whole book about, like, trying to stay away from that and, making sure you're thinking about, like, what's the worst case scenario? Like, trying to think about those things instead. And yet I find myself going through this book wondering, like, okay, yes, it's okay to process what's worst case scenario, remember death, like, you'll appreciate life more if you are aware of how fragile it is. And yet I find myself, like, being really hard on myself with the negative thoughts, knowing that's a bad thing. Like, I was talking about this earlier, like, so then I obviously need to replace them with something, thus the positive side of it. So I think I'm still kind of on the fence, but I think I need to at least adopt some of this. But yes, Zig Ziglar, I at least like listening to him. I mean, he has since passed, if memory
Yeah.
works. But he has a lot of great stuff out there. That's for sure.
One of the things I think I have issue with here is with the "don't fake it till you make it" thing. Um, I feel like you have to decide where the point is between this is truth or this is a lie. There's no gray area here. Either it's true or it's not. And where does that switch, not dial, get flipped? I don't know. And forcing myself to move the threshold seems like a bad idea. We covered Atomic Habits by James Clear, and he talks in there about identity driven habits. And every time you show up and you do the thing, you are casting a vote for the type of person that you want to become. And he has a line in there, something like, just do that enough times and eventually you win the election in your mind. And I feel like that is the better way to approach this. If you just continue to do the thing, at some point, your brain just says, oh, yeah, I'm a writer because I show up and I write. You can't compare yourself to other writers. Going back to your magician story, you can't say, well, I'm not a magician because I'm not as good as this other person. So I don't know, maybe this is different for different people. Like they approach this from different angles. But for me, it just seems like don't even worry about it. Just continue to do the thing. And then eventually you're just going to believe it. And this seems like just motivational pep talk type stuff to get you to the point where you show up every day. And I know there's different personalities that need that sort of stuff. My personality is like, if this is the thing that needs to get done, it is going to get done. It does not matter what you feel like. You are going to show up and you are going to do it because you said you're going to do it. And I totally recognize that not everybody follows through on their commitments to themselves like that, but I have trouble identifying with this, and I think that might be why.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that like if I make a commitment and somebody else is involved, high water, I'll be there. Doesn't matter. Like, I will make it happen. If it's a commitment to me, I will always find a way to put that off. Like I will find a reason and follow through on that excuse and not do it. Like that's my thing, which is why like having Bookworm set for every 2 weeks is gold for me because I know it's coming. I know Mike's planning on me being there at that recording, and I can't miss that. I have to make that. But if it's like if I don't want to do this, but if Mike were not involved with Bookworm and it was just me, it would probably die pretty quick because I wouldn't stick with it. I just wouldn't. So, like, I need somebody else's accountability in order to make those commitments happen. So, this type of a motivational thing, it is helpful to me at least on a small scale. But like, I have so many different motivation things that I have to work myself through in order to accomplish things that it's not as simple as like do overwhelming action. Like, it's not that easy, at least for me. And I haven't found the switch there. That's why I resonate with the dial concept on it.
Makes sense. So what you're saying is you need a new anthem.
Possibly, Mike. Possibly.
All right. So let's talk about that. Chapter 8 is put the new anthem on repeat. And when I say the new anthem, I don't mean a collection of new soundtracks that you've collected. I mean specifically the new anthem that Jon Acuff has written for you on page 135. This is the point where I really disconnected from this book. I understand what he's doing here. It's helpful to people not to have to manufacture this on your own. And he made a point of calling out from the very beginning of the book, the person who helped him with this. He would say his entire name, including the doctor and the PhD at the end. to create this validation that they have done all this research, they've talked to all these people. This guy's way smarter than I am, so trust him, and this thing works. And I don't doubt that it would work, but I also don't think there's anything magical about what he has here. I think you could create your own, and if you created your own, you would attach to it much more strongly than something that Jon Acuff wrote for you. And I say that because we've gone through, as an action item from Bookworm, creating these core values for our families. And I identified them. I had a friend create a manifesto type graphic. I had it framed. It is printed and hanging on our living room wall. And this affects every commitment that we make. It's what we filter everything through. I am blown away these however many years later at the benefit that that has continued to provide, because we came up with them, not because somebody said this is what you need to do in order to have a strong family. So I definitely have doubts towards this new anthem. What do you think? Are you going to implement this?
It's way too long.
It is pretty long. That is true.
I had written in my notes that it was on page 153 like you did, because I was, and this is why I was looking it up while you were talking, because this sucker's long. Like, I'm not even going to read this all because it would take too long to go through it. So, like, he wants you to find a mirror, stand up straight, confidently say the following out loud, and then he gives you this whole thing. It's like, I, Joe Bulick, choose my thoughts. I know that doing my best starts with thinking my best. And, like, it's this whole thing. Here are 10 things I know. And he runs through these 10 items. And I cannot argue that if you were to do this, you would probably feel better about yourself. At least for a little bit, right? Like, I'm not going to argue that at all.
You totally would.
But, like I was saying, it's long. He gave me a thing when I kind of got the feeling he said he wasn't going to give me a thing. And I felt like it contradicted what he's been telling me so far. Save, like, one, like, borrow from the best. Like, he's telling you to borrow these things. Like, that particular piece probably makes this okay. I don't know. I just didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. And yet I find myself thinking, like, it probably does help, but I just don't like the way it was brought forward. Like, I didn't like it. So there's that. Yeah,
so I have mentioned a gazillion times that I immediately followed up this book with The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, which I enjoyed much more than this one, to be honest. One of the things that was surprising to me about that, I did not realize this, just so you all know, Norman Vincent Peale was a pastor. Is a pastor? I don't know if he's still around. This book, the 1987 version that I have, had sold 15 million copies. And his advice from the very beginning is basically to get in front of the mirror, just like Jon Acuff is saying, morning and evening. But instead of repeating the new anthem that Jon is giving me, specifically a couple key Bible verses. So I have been doing that. And I am seeing some benefit from that. And I think you could decide for yourself, if the Bible isn't the thing, you can insert whatever you want there. But that is why this new anthem does not stick with me. This is something somebody else has made up. It didn't come from me, and it's not the source of ultimate truth for me. So those three things combined, like, I have no time for this new anthem. Sorry, Jon.
But like I was saying, like, if my sense is, and I don't know that I could articulate why here. A lot of times, like, if I have these thoughts, I've spent some time with it and I can tell you why. I've spent some time with this, I can't tell you why. But if you are the type of person who's willing to get up in the morning, look up in the mirror, and have something that you say every morning, like, generally the people that you hear from that do that say how great of an experience that is. Doesn't seem to matter what it is that you're saying, like whether it's a Bible verse, it's a one-sentence thing, it's something Gary V said at some point, it's some deal that a pastor mentioned at one point, or it's this new anthem. I don't know that it matters what it is. People always say that that's a positive experience, and yet when I get up in the morning and I look at the mirror, all I really notice is, did I shave yet? Like, that's really what I think about. Like, I'm not gonna repeat something. Like, my brain is race car brain, like, on to what are the next 5 steps I've got this morning. Am I loading something on the trailer before the kids get up? Am I trying to clean something up in the kitchen before people are up in the morning? Like, am I reading a book for an extra 20 minutes this morning? Like, those are what my brain goes to, not chanting something at myself. I don't know.
Yeah. See, that's the thing. I think there's value in that. I do think though that either having something like the Bible verses, which I ascribe more value to than the writings of Jon Acuff, would be a better implementation. Or the other option would be come up with something yourself that is very meaningful. I don't like this use this prepackaged thing. I don't know what it is about that. Like you said, I'm sure if you did this, you would get some results, but this just seems like the worst of all the possible options to me. And it's the one that he's really leaning into. He's got a couple of questions about, does this actually work? And he's got his doctor guy who's done all the research and shared all the statistics about people are 250% more likely to reduce overthinking. These sound like very generic positive thinking type quotes to me. And I feel like if you were to replicate this research using other statements, you would get identical, if not better, results. That's kind of my, as I was leaving this chapter, that's kind of what I was thinking. So let's go to the next one here, chapter 9, because we are, per usual, running a little bit long. Chapter 9 is gather evidence. And this is where he talks about the pocket jury. I'm not sure what I think about this analogy. A pocket jury is a collection of broken soundtracks that judge your life whenever you dare to be more than you currently are. And I get the point that he's trying to make here. These are the voices that are telling you that you can't, you won't, you're not smart enough, you're not good enough, etc. So you want to gather evidence to show that you can actually do these things and convince the pocket jury that what they are telling you is not true, because you've got a long line of I've done this, that, and the other thing to reinforce the positive soundtrack instead. One of the things that he uses here is the quote, "Everything is always working out for me," which that quote, I feel like that can help you locate yourself in terms of this positivity ratio. What sort of reaction do you have when you verbally say that out loud? Everything is always working out for me. What do you like? That might be true. Absolutely. And I can think of a whole bunch of reasons why that's true. Or, man, I really wish that was true.
I had the latter of those. Like, I really wish that was true, because there are many, many things that I like. Remodeling, like, everything is working out for me. No, the floor's not flat. Like, it didn't just magically come together. Like, no, it's not. Like, I have to work my tail off to make it certain ways so that it can have a chance at working out. I feel like I am spending most of, like, you were talking about always looking for issues or problems or being critical of things, right? And you didn't use those words, but something around that topic. And like, well, that's my job. Like, my job is to find problems and fix them. That's what I do.
Yep.
So I'm regularly hunting for things that have gone wrong or not quite as good enough as I wanted them to be. Like, that's what I do. So for me to say everything is working out for me, like, no. And if it were, I wouldn't have a job. Like, that's where my brain goes.
Not necessarily. See, this is the point where I start to realize maybe I've got some work to do in this area, because I think that everything is always working out for me. You can find evidence to support that, or you can find evidence to refute that.
Correct. Yes.
In The Power of Positive Thinking, Norman Vincent Peale talks about this guy who comes to him and he's ready to commit suicide. He's so depressed and my life is just terrible. And Norman's like, well, you got here today, so you walked here. You know, you have legs that work. And he just starts listing all of these things. He goes, well, that's true, that's true, that's true. And then by the end of the 5-minute session, he's got a list of 12 things that are actually going very well for him. So his situation isn't nearly as bleak as he thought it was. And then also with with the description that you just had there of your job is to find these problems and then create solutions. Again, you can focus on the problem or you can focus on the solution. So you could interpret everything is always working out for me as, yeah, there were all these unexpected things and the floor wasn't level and yada, yada, yada. But I was able to make it level and get the carpet and whatever else I needed to do.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that you should take that approach, because I think I'm very much like you, where my natural reaction is to focus on, well, all of these things are not right. But I took this, and then he mentions the positivity ratio, which we've heard at other places, of about 3-1. So you should have 3 positive thoughts for every 1 negative thought, essentially, in order, like, that's the healthy ratio. I got to confront myself, look at that and admit that I'm nowhere near that. So all of the things that we think, I feel like there's sources for all of this stuff. There's seeds that are planted, and this is kind of the manifestation of things. And we've read all these books, and we've heard many, many times, like, surround yourself with positive people. And that's just one area. It could be people at work. It could be people in your family. Who are the voices that are speaking into your life? And what effect is that having on you? And I'm kind of recognizing, well, so there's a lot of things that I've just dismissed. It's like, well, I can't change that situation, so I'm just going to have to endure it. But it does have an impact on you. Nothing is neutral, is kind of what I'm recognizing. And maybe I can never get to that 3-1 positivity ratio, but I got a long ways to go, and I am definitely going to try.
No, those are very good points to make, because I've had this conversation with Becky a few times. Because my job is to, as I refer to it, the soundtrack I say is I look for problems and I solve them. But that's not entirely true, and it's good for you to point that out, because a lot of what I end up doing day to day is setting direction, choosing what the future of tech at our church looks like, and making decisions around how to go about achieving different projects for future purposes. Like, now that reveals itself in, I have the problem of not having a cable from this room to that room. Like, that's the problem. But you could pose it as, like, we're adding features as opposed to solving a negative. Like, you could definitely do that. And maybe, well, before I get to that, the reason I bring that up is because it's so easy for me to think of it as putting out fires that it ends up creating, like, this overarching negative cloud in my head, which then bleeds over into so many different areas. I got a fly in my face I'm going to die trying to kill. So there's so many things that I'm just trying to, like, deal with, that it definitely bleeds over. And maybe that's why I'm so, like, giving Jon Acuff the side eye here. Because, like, to me, it's like, okay, no, it's not always like that. You're a little sugarcoaty here. Like, that's not quite right. That could be because of that cloud that I've got in my, like, over my head at all times. Which either means, I'm jumping way ahead, either means that this is exactly the book I needed to listen to and pay attention to, or Acuff is smoking something, and I'm not going to listen to him at all.
That's true. That's true. All right, so let's jump ahead here to the end. There's one more chapter, and then we could talk about the book in general. So chapter 10 is make a soundtrack stick with a symbol. And the big message here is that you just got to find something that helps this stuff stick for you. And it doesn't matter if it works for anybody else, it just needs to work for you. He has this phrase, it sounds crazy, but I don't care because it works. And the one thing I got out of this chapter is that pens are my symbols.
I kind of thought of that one, yeah.
Yeah. So I buy a new pen, even this one that I got for National Fountain Pen Day. I have a event that this is signifying as a transition point or something that I've done, and I want like a memento of that specific moment in time. Every single pen in my collection has one of those. And if you were to like open up my pen box behind me and quiz me, I could tell you, but that kind of makes me feel uncomfortable, that idea that anybody would ever do that. And then I realized this chapter, that's because it's not for anybody else. Who cares whether I have this symbolism attached to these things except for me? And it doesn't matter if you think it's a completely enabling mechanism just to buy more pens. Go ahead and think that. It helps me consistently do things and ship things and make things that I'm proud of. And so it's reinforcing that positive soundtrack to Jon's metaphor of I'm a person who makes things. And I recognize at this point, this is the first time that I felt like I didn't need to explain this to anybody else ever again. And if that's the only thing I got out of this book, it's probably valid. Like that's a good enough reason to pick it up and read it from start to finish. And so I share that here just as an example of like, you never know what you're going to get out of these books. And it might just be that one thing that provides a ton of value for you. I can't even communicate in an audio podcast, even via video, how much of a weight that lifts off of my shoulder. And that sounds really stupid to describe that, but that's the whole thing he's talking about here is you're carrying around this big mental burden, all this negativity, like all the stuff that you're doing. You don't really have a good reason for that. You're just a poser. You're a fraud. Everyone's going to find out you're an imposter. You know, all that kind of stuff. This whole book is talking about how to beat some of that. And so this is a very effective way to end it, I think, where he's saying, whatever you got to do, just do it. And don't worry about anybody else.
Yeah, this whole symbol thing and attaching publicity to it, like that, I get that people do that, and I understand that, like, especially in your case, like you assumed that you had to have some public rationale for it. And when you've talked about your pens or mentioned, like, you got a new pen, like you've mentioned that quite a few times whenever we've started an episode. And to me, it felt like you were always justifying your pens. But, like, you don't have to do that. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's totally on me, by the way. That's not you saying,
correct.
Well, what's your reason or excuse this time? Just that's the soundtrack. It's like,
yes.
Well, you collect pens as trophies. What have you done that's worthy of a trophy lately? Not much.
Right. I collect tools. Like, if I collect anything, it's tools in some form or another. Whether it's computer tools, because, like, I love my audio tools and, like, the stream decks, and, like, I love all of my gadgets and stuff, but it's also translated into, like, hammers and specialty screwdrivers and power tools. Like, I collect that sort of thing. And, like, I can tell you, like, similar to your pens, like, I can tell you what project I bought tools for and what I used it for and how that project helped me do whatever it was, to help somebody put stairs in their house, or, you know, whatever it is, build a china cabinet, like whatever that is. Like, I know what those tools were used for. So, like, it's not a pen, it's not like a specific category, but it's like this great big overarching thing. that I tend to adopt. But yeah, I always have a story for it, but I've never tried to justify it to anybody. I've always had to try to justify it to myself that I could warrant buying more tools. So I do that to me, and I do it with my wife, but it doesn't really go outside of that. So like in my case, like I feel like I'm okay there, but that's kind of a symbol there. Like the part of this that I felt like I didn't have quite nailed down is like, okay, if I'm going to put together a symbol for trying to be more positive with my job, like I don't really have a symbol for that. I don't know that I need one, but there's not one currently. And to me, that's kind of the hard part with this is, okay, if I need to have a soundtrack with a symbol attached to it, like, okay, it doesn't have to be one thing, but then the question is, well, how many do you want? I mean, obviously it's subjective, but when are those lines drawn and when do you put one in? When do you flip the switch? As much as he doesn't like us using switches. So, like,
It's a dial, Joe.
Where is that? I know, but how do you dial a yes or no on a symbol? I don't know. But
It's true.
like that's the part that I kind of wondered about, but I don't have an answer on that one. Like I don't know where you put these in, where you don't. I felt like that wasn't necessarily clear. I don't know that it needs to be clear. It's just a question that I have.
Yeah, well, the tool thing, I want to speak to that real briefly because I feel like it depends how public you are with your symbols and hobbies, whatever. But I feel like the battle of justification happens in your mind first. And then, like, if you had people coming over to borrow your tools all the time and you had this really outrageous tool and they were kind of like shocked that you had this thing, are you going to be like, oh, well, I bought that because I did this thing? Would you feel that pressure? Maybe, maybe not. But I feel like maybe with some stuff, you just don't have the opportunity to share it publicly. And the minute that you feel that you have to explain it publicly, that is a hint that you haven't resolved this in your own head yet. Because no one's putting pressure on you but you have to verbally externalize the reasoning behind it.
Yep. Yep.
Like that's what's surprising to me about this. But I love the idea of symbols. I feel like this is something I'm fairly good at. So many things here in my office have some sort of motivational symbolism attached to it. We did rhinoceros success a while back. I got my rhino right right here. You know, I have all of these things as visual cues to reinforce positive soundtracks, I believe. But I feel like this stuff has a bigger impact than most people realize. I believe that it's important for a long time. And so I've collected these things, but this was good validation for some of that stuff. And at the end of the book specifically, it's very effective in like reinforcing that these soundtracks can switch from positive and negative or vice versa so easily that you really should be doing everything that you can to reinforce the positive ones. So just do what you got to do and don't worry about explaining it to anybody else.
Right.
Everybody's weird in their own way.
It's true. Mike's just weirder than I am.
That might also be true.
It's not true at all. I am definitely the oddball.
All right, let's talk about action items, shall we?
Sure.
All right, so I have two of them. The first one comes from chapter, let's see, where was it? Chapter 3. And that is to identify my turn down techniques, which is something we didn't talk a whole lot about, but those are just specifically tactics that you can use to lower the negative voices in your head. He listed a couple of them. One of them for him was running. He's even more of a crazy runner than I am, but that is one for me as well. I want to identify the other ones that I use or can potentially use. And then the second one comes from chapter 7, the Zig Ziglar one. And I want to ask myself, am I focusing on the problem or the solution? Because I tend to get stuck in the problems and I want to shift and talk about solutions. Do you have any action items from this book?
I have a couple. Yeah. One comes from the chapter "Don't Fight It, Flip It," chapter 6, and that's to try to notice some of these that I tell myself and flip them on their head. I don't know how to, like, this is gonna be a bank of these. Like, I don't know how you hold accountability on these things, but like there are a lot of things I tell myself regularly that I need to flip. And I don't even remember which chapter it was, but he talked about how like we can have these soundtracks about certain things or people, even like every time a certain person comes up, you'll have a soundtrack that you'll tell yourself about that person, which may or may not be true or accurate, and at least not 100% accurate. So like trying to flip that would be really really helpful in many cases. So that's one that I've got, is like just trying to pay attention to these things and flip them. And the other one is I want to try to think through this whole symbol concept. If my theory is true and I have made my brain focus on solving problems and looking for problems as opposed to seeing future positive, I don't even know what term to use there, for my job, like whatever that is, like I feel like if that's true, then I probably should listen to Jon a little bit more. And I'm going to try to start some of that process just to kind of test that ground. But I feel like putting a couple symbols in place to help remind me of that would be helpful. I don't know what those are quite yet, but I'm going to try to locate at least one for our next recordings. Something that would help me just remember to flip some of those soundtracks when it comes to my day job. But again, I'm not real sure what that is yet. So there you go. Those are my two.
All right. Well, let's talk about style and rating, shall we?
Sure.
So this was my book. I will go first. And I will start by saying that Jon Acuff has a very unique style. You will either love it or hate it.
Very quickly, too.
Yeah, I don't think I loved it. He and you kind of mentioned this with his social media presence. He's kind of a funny guy. He tells a lot of jokes. And if you like that kind of thing, then you're going to love his style. It's very easy and approachable to read, I will say that. But it ends up, for me, sounding a bit exaggerated. And in my mind, it makes the message less authentic. But I've never met him. So maybe he really is just this crazy all the time. I don't know. I feel like he's a good writer, and the imagery and the ridiculous situations that sometimes that he describes, like they're very effective in communicating the points and provoking the emotions that he's trying to draw out from the reader. But it's a little over the top for me. I also not a huge fan of the way the book is laid out. I know we rail against the three parts. I kind of wish this book had parts, though. Like the 10 different chapters, just one right after the other, very linear in a progression. It felt weird, uh, especially when there were chapters where it felt like some of these ideas didn't carry nearly as much weight as some of the other chapters did. It's like if you have them all listed separately and they're not lumped together, they got to stand on their own, and some of them didn't feel like they stood on their own to me. They're laid out pretty much the same way for every single one of these, where he tells a story at the beginning, then he gets into his thoughts on whatever topic, and then there's a couple listicle style points near the end, which is probably effective for a lot of people. I found it very cookie cutter, though, and felt like he could have been a, a bit more, maybe creative isn't the right word, but original with this. I don't know. He does a really good job of running with the soundtrack metaphor, but maybe there's an opportunity, like I said, with the musical stuff to frame it that way. This is act one, this is act two, that sort of thing. But this is all like really nitpicky stuff. I think the message of the book is pretty good. I do feel like in terms of content, uh, it's a little bit light for my taste, but I think part of that is intended with the style. A lot of the stories he's over the top with them, and that's intentional because that's what people expect maybe from Jon Acuff. And so if you're coming to this like I want to learn something, but primarily to be entertained, then maybe you get a different reaction to it than I did. We've covered quite a few books on Bookworm that span the entire range. There have been like college textbooks, dry, boring, but really, really meaty ideas in there. And then this one's all the way on the other end of the spectrum, where it's even beyond something like the Patrick Lencioni fables, I would say, in terms of he's trying to be funny and tackle a serious topic at the same time, which is kind of Jon Acuff. So if you are looking for that sort of thing, then this is great. I mentioned at the beginning, we both thought we had covered a Jon Acuff book. We had not. Is that a good or a bad thing? I think it maybe is a little bit of a bad thing because once you hear a few jokes, you're like, oh, yeah, this all sounds the same. I think in terms of communicating a very powerful idea, that's not a good thing to leave your audience with. Maybe that's not John's fault. Maybe that's my fault and your fault. And we've just jaded because we've read so many boring nonfiction books. I don't know. This is definitely not my cup of tea, though. I'm going to rate this 3.5. I think for the right person, this is a great introduction to the topic. I have since, like I said, finished a Gap book, which gave me more of what I wanted on this topic and dove a lot deeper into it. And so it's not the subject matter that I dock here. It's simply that John's style is not really for me.
All right. Well, on my side, like he's just over the top. Like I think he just takes things too far for me. I have met him actually. He did a book tour somewhere nearby, and right after he finished releasing and doing all the things with his book Finish, and I had read it and went to have it signed. So I actually have a signed copy of Finish, and he is just like that. Like that's just him. Like he's super funny. Like that's just the way he is. And I could easily like see him saying the words that he has in this book. And because of that, it made it a little easier for me to read. But at the same time, like I find myself like, okay, you're like I know that he's playing games with words and it's fun and it's very light. And it's not a very long book, honestly, and it's not super meaty. And one of the things that kind of bugged me about it is that, and I haven't mentioned this, but at the end of his book, Finish, talking about, tying books together. Thank you, Adler. At the end of his book, Finish, I think it's in his conclusion or afterward or something there, he makes the comment that he'll never write a book again without having a doctorate person or some scientist help him with the research and science behind it. Like he would never write a book again without that, because in Finish, he does tons and tons of science. He had a PhD that helped him run some studies for that book, and it went really, really well. And I thought he did a good job with it. He attempts to mimic that with this. Maybe it's just me, but I felt like he threw out the PhD guy at the very beginning, kind of left him aside until towards the end, and then brought him back out again.
Yep.
And like that's the opposite of what I expected him to do, because again, Finish was his last book before this one. And because of that comment that he said at the end of Finish, like to be honest, when you picked this, I was thrilled to death because like I knew he was going to nail the scientist side of this and have all of this background research, and I knew he was going to have all the studies and he was going to follow through on all the data side of it. My brain like thrives on that, and I got like none of it. So I'm very underwhelmed by that part and kind of frustrated that he didn't follow through on what I felt like was his claim at the end of his last book. So I kind of have that in the back of my head here as well, and I'm kind of frustrated with him over that. Um, he does exaggerate things. He's trying to make a point, and he loves to make a big deal out of small things, and that's again just his style. But I don't know, he just didn't deliver for me, and it's on a topic that I feel like I do a lot of. Like I do a lot of overthinking, and I felt like this was a good chance to help people with that. And I know that it has helped a lot of people, just seeing the comments that people make about this book online. Like I know that this book has helped a lot of people. I just don't think I'm one of them. I don't think this is going to fit, the broader scheme of the number of books that we've covered. Like I don't feel like this fits based on the science and stuff that we've had. Now, again, either that's because I'm stuck in my ways and don't want to think about it this way because I don't like it, because it's actually striking a chord, or I'm actually right and there's not a lot here to stand on. So anyway, all that to say, like there are some positives here. I think it would be good for some people. I don't feel like it's going to be a solid book for most, just because of the airiness that I find with it. So I think you rated it right, 3.5. I think that's a good spot to land on it. Like there's some small nuggets here and there that you can pick from it. At this point, we've kind of reached a point, Mike, where like if you get one solid nugget out of a book, the book was worth it. Like I'm glad I read it. Like I'm certainly not saying that it was a bad choice to read it, but I got my nuggets. Like it's not anything amazing. It's not anything that's like, yep, that's a nugget that people absolutely have to pick up. Like that's not the case at all. So anyway, 3.5. I'll stay there.
All right. So let's put soundtracks on the shelf. What's next, Joe?
Next, we're going back in time with William George Jordan in a book called Self-Control. It's Kingship and Majesty. This is considered one of the predecessors and instigators of the whole self-help book category, I've found. Written in 1907. Have we done a 100-year-old book yet on this show?
Good question. Think and Grow Rich might be older than that.
Ooh, yeah. I don't know. Maybe. I don't remember. But anyway, this one goes back in time. Has, coming from the early 1900s, it's going to have a fairly strong religious bent to it. I've started it, and I don't feel like it's a super strong bent, so I think it's not going to be like crazy churchy for an episode. But I'm excited to go through this one because there's some language that's a little bit challenging at times, but I think it'll be fun. It'll be something different for sure.
It is different. I have this one.
Yep. It's a short one too.
It is. Yep.
So anyway, what's after that, Mike?
After that is the one that I was teasing at the beginning. Blake wanted to know before he had to take off from the live recording. And I said, this is the book you would probably never expect me to pick. And that is another Oliver Burkeman book, 4,000 Weeks. The subtitle is something like Time Management for Mere Mortals. This one was recommended in the club, and I've also heard from people who have said this is the best book that they have read this year. So we're going to give it a shot, and I'm going to go into this with my Oliver Burkeman prejudice. So change my mind, Mr. Berkman.
Usually when you have that attitude, it's over a book that I've selected. So
you selected the previous one.
I know.
So, yeah.
Which is why I'm shocked that you picked this one. So, all right. Sure.
I've heard lots of good things about this book, to be honest, from multiple places. So I feel like I need to give it another shot.
Sure.
And see if there's something here.
Sure.
You got any Gap books, Joe?
I do, actually.
What do you got?
It's been a long time since I've picked up a Gap book, but this is one that's been, I've seen a couple of local friends read this, but it's called Take Back Your Family by Jefferson Bethke. And Jefferson, I saw give a talk at what's known as the D6 conference a few years ago. And that is that conference and his talk is what set my wife and my family on the path of doing our Sabbath dinners on Saturday nights. That's what instigated all of that. And having seen that this is a book he put out, I'm super curious to see what he talks about in it. Thus, my goal is to, before our next go at this, read that and our Bookworm book, considering they're both kind of short. So there you go. Joe finally has a Gap book.
Nicely done.
Yeah. What's yours?
Mine is the book that I had intended to pick for next time, but I'm going to bump it to a Gap book just because it's continuing on this theme of self-talk and positive thinking. That is Thanks by Dr. Robert Emmons, who many people consider to be the gratitude guy. He's the one who did all the research that shows that gratitude can make you 25% happier. This is the book where that statistic comes from. I've heard about this book before, and so I am going to read this one in my positive self-talk affirmation journey.
You like to binge topics, don't you?
Not really. Just the theme here is that Mike recognizes I need a lot of work.
Sure.
Specifically in this area.
But I think, I do this too. A lot of us have a tendency, like, if there's something I'm struggling with, like, I want to know all the things about it. Like, tell me absolutely everything I could possibly know about feeding turtles, because I now have a turtle. Like, I don't, but that is what came to my brain. So, yes, tell me all the things about it.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm doing here.
Cool.
All right, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks, everyone who attended the live recording. There's some great comments, which spurred some interesting conversation. So thank you for contributing. If you want to join us, you can do that at youtube.com/bookwormfm. And the schedule usually comes out there first, unless one of us has an emergency. We got to move things. I also want to say thank you specifically to the Bookworm Club premium members who contribute financially every month to help us keep the lights on. We've been trying to get some podcast sponsors lined up and things like that, but the only way that this continues to be sustainable is because people like our members continue to pay us $5 a month or $50 a year to keep the lights on. We try to give you some benefits in exchange for your money. One of the things we do is I take these book notes in MindNote. I have these MindNote files from all the books that we read, and a lot of the Gap books too, and I upload those to the Bookworm Club. So you can go into, if you're a Premium Club member, you can go into the members section and download either the PDF files or the MindNote files if you want to customize them and change them for yourself. Joe's also got some Gap book episodes that he recorded by himself a while back. There's a Bookworm wallpaper that I designed, but really the thing you get is our undying gratitude. That's not just something that we say. We really do appreciate everyone who's willing to not just download and listen and let us hopefully entertain you for a couple of hours. Maybe you learn some things, but people who are willing to give us some money to keep this thing going, we really appreciate you all.
Yeah.
I guess I should tell you how to join, by the way.
Yes.
If you want to become a member, go to bookworm.fm/membership.
There you go. Yeah, and we mentioned this early on, but if you'd rather have something very tangible and still support the show, you can still buy shirts and sweatshirts. We're big fans of the sweatshirts. That's if you have to buy one or the other, the sweatshirt is where it's at. And you can do that
today
as well. Yeah, absolutely. Bookworm.fm, there's a link in the menu there that'll get you to where you need to go to pick those up. So yes, thank you to all of you who have tuned in today and that continue to support us. And if you are one of those amazing members who reads along with us, pick up Self-Control by William George Jordan, and we'll cover that one in a couple of weeks.
All right. Long one today.
Yes, sir.
Oh, man. I'm going to have to run right away, so I'll just say thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Everybody's watching this video still. We'll catch you next time.
All right. See you, team. Bye, all.
Sorry, Martin.